All right, fans, how are you doing? It's Brad doing another vlog. I put a blog up this week, a couple of days ago, called "Us and Them" after the old Pink Floyd song, and it was about the whole immigration thing that's going on. Of course, Donald Trump banned immigration from 7 countries supposedly temporarily, and a whole bunch of chaos erupted. You know this, and if you want to know more about this, turn on the news. Don't turn on me. I reflected on this stuff from the point of view of having been an immigrant for a large section of my life. My memory starts from, except for a couple of vague incidents I can remember from before going to Kenya. It really starts in Africa. Uh, so I sort of attained consciousness as a human being in Africa, and so the norm of my life at that time was to be a minority. And of course, we weren't exactly a persecuted minority, but we were definitely different from the rest of the country. What I can remember distinctly, even as a child, was that I learned quickly that it was useful to let African people I met know that I was an American. Kenya won its independence from Britain in 1963, and so we were just barely 10 years. In fact, I was there for the 10-year celebration of Kenyan independence. So there was a lot of resentment towards the British, but Americans were a fairly new presence in Kenya at the time, and African people, Kenyan people, didn't have any strong opinions. They had strong opinions about British, but they had no real opinions about Americans. So even as a kid, I found it useful to work that into a conversation early on. Little things like that kind of informed my growing up. Knowing that I would stand out wherever I went. There was definitely racial prejudice against my kind. Um, for different reasons than racial prejudice in America exists, but racial prejudice is racial prejudice, and you can say it's justified or not. But you get it. You get lumped into a category of people and then judged. Then I moved to Japan when I was 29, and once again, racial minority. And noticed on the streets. But, having been a child and dealt with this as a child, it wasn't that big of a deal to deal with it as an adult. So being an immigrant is tough. It also has some advantages because you can kind of view the culture as an outsider, and you don't have to be parts of certain things. And you can also choose to live apart from the main culture. A lot of Americans I knew in Japan did that. They had like special cable hookups so that they could get American TV shows. When the internet came, they just kind of dove into that. They only went places where people spoke English. They refused to learn Japanese. They didn't follow the cultural norms. I didn't want to be like that. I was kind of I wanted to be a good part of Japan. I figured if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be part of this thing. So I learned about Japanese culture and Japanese norm. I learned to speak Japanese. Ammari yoku nai desu kedo, 今まで日本語ができます。あんまり良くない日本語ですけど、できます。とにかく。Anyway, so I learned to speak Japanese, and I kind of fit in. As much as one can, fit in and stood out. So I knew how to deal, but I stood out everywhere I went. So I have sympathy for people coming in, but I also have a kind of feeling that you can't let everybody in, which is probably the kind of thing I'm glad right now that hardly anybody watches this, because if it came out that I said that, I'd probably get tarred and feathered by the sort of left wing the standard left-wing American Buddhist crowd. But I do feel you can't let everybody in, and this was certainly the case in Japan. It was tough to immigrate. I lived there 11 years. Was at the time married to a Japanese woman. I worked for a very famous company, so every time I went to immigration to do my paperwork and they saw who I worked for, the immigration guys were invariably impressed by who I worked for and had questions, because they all grew up watching Ultraman, and they'd be like, "Oh, you work for the people that make Ultraman? Isn't that cool? Do you ever get to wear the costumes?" And they'd chat me up with stuff like that. Even so, I never got past getting a 3-year working visa. I would apply for permanent residency, don't know how many times, uh, and get denied. And you could get deported for anything. That this was also something we all knew. Even half a joint of marijuana, if they'd caught you with it, that would be grounds for deportation. The little things that we Americans would think of as tiny infractions of the law could, if you got arrested for just about anything. Deportation was a possibility. But the larger question that seems to be coming up in a lot of the discussion I'm seeing online and whatever is whether Buddhists should be political. I think this is one of those questions that deserves the Buddha's famous answer, which is the question does not fit the case. Buddha was often asked sort of impossible questions, and his standard answer was either silence or the question does not fit the case. There's no should or should not. If you want to be political, be political. If you don't want to be political, don't be political. I pay more attention now that Trump got elected than I did before Trump got elected, which I think in itself is interesting. And I think a lot of people are like me. We weren't paying much attention to what was going on the last 8 years politically, just kind of letting it go. And now we're watching every little move that Trump makes. I'm not quite watching every little move, but I'm paying attention in ways that I wasn't before. So that in itself is positive. We're actually looking at what our government is doing. So I think that's a good outcome of all this. Sometimes I think about our predecessors in Buddhism and what they did. And if you were to read Dogen's voluminous written work, and if you read all of that stuff, you might come away with the impression that there was nothing going on politically in Dogen's time. And I think a lot of people who are Buddhists, without thinking about it really deeply, without questioning what was going on in those times politically, we just kind of assume that maybe nothing was going on because our sources don't mention it. But there was a hell of a lot going on in Dogen's time politically. Particularly to him personally, his father was assassinated, a political assassination when Dogen was 3 years old. He probably barely knew his father. But he would have known that his father was politically assassinated. And this was just normal. Things were so politically crazy in Dogen's time that there's an entire television genre of soap operas in Japan based on medieval Japanese politics. It was nutty. So if Dogen had chosen to be a political activist, there would be certainly a lot of things he could have been politically active about. Of course, it was a totally different time, and he would have had to go about it in a completely different way than we do these days. But there were writers of his time who wrote a lot about politics, and there was opposition, and there was pro-emperor and anti-emperor and the samurai and all that stuff. Dogen stayed out of it. Dogen moved his entire temple from Kyoto, near the capital, out to the outskirts of what was then called Echizen, which is way far away from anything, even today, in order to not be involved in the political intrigue that was going on within Buddhism. So he was if anything anti-political, uh, which doesn't mean we should be anti-political. It's just that there is no precedent within Buddhism that says you must be political. So all these people that are kind of going out there saying Buddhists must stand up for, they're wrong. They're wrong. Buddhists can stand up for political stuff if they want to, but there's no obligation. There's no Buddhist obligation to be political. I feel like what's going on politically anywhere and everywhere and for all time is probably mostly unavailable to us as conscious beings. I think it goes on below that level. I think humanity as a whole has a drive and interests in things it wants to do, in ways that it wants to move. And individual human beings get kind of carried along with this. So what's really going on, let's do the illustration with the hand, is all this stuff is moving us in certain ways. And this finger might fight with this finger, and that finger might fight with that finger, and this one might get in there, and they tussle and they wrangle, all on top of a much larger thing, that goes way deeper than the individual. And we get carried along with that. And so our actions as individuals politically do have some impact, obviously. But the larger tide is what determines where it goes. And I'm not advocating a kind of a passivity towards that. You can be as active as you want, but you can only affect, a certain degree. So maybe if enough enough pressure goes on these couple of fingers to move, that maybe the direction starts to go this way for a while, but then the pressure kind of comes back on this side and it's going to move this way, and we're just going to kind of get carried along with it. I've realized that I've lived in this sort of left-wing bubble for a long time, and while I'm not as left-wing as I used to be. I'm probably pretty centrist in my politics, which I've come across on the internet lately as being a kind of dirty word among some people. But I feel like that's the only sensible position, because the left wing is stupid and the right wing is stupid. The people just get carried along with trends on both sides. What everybody else is doing here and what everybody else is doing there, and I'm not interested in that because it's just dumb. But what I've been trying to do is look into what right-wingers and conservatives are saying. Now, if you want, you can go on YouTube or various other sources on the internet and find plenty of examples that will confirm your bias. So if you want to find stupid right-wing people being stupid, you can find a ton of it. If you want to find stupid left-wing SJW people doing idiotic things, you can find a ton of that, and it'll confirm whatever bias you have. Those are entertaining. I can even be entertained by that for a little while, in this sort of base, stupid way that all human beings are sort of entertained by, like, oh, look at that. What's more challenging, though, I've found, is trying to find people who can speak or write intelligently whose views you do not agree with. So I've been seeking those out. I've actually been trying to dive into this world, and I've discovered a number of intelligent right-wing people who can explain their right-wing views in ways that I might not agree with, but at least I can follow it. And it's not just frothing at the mouth, oh, dumb stuff. It's, actually solid, here's the reasons why we should ban immigration from these 7 countries. Go look at that. Don't just go into it with the view of trying to find ways to shore up your own argument. I mean, you can do that if you're on a debate team or something. It might have some value or whatever. But really, for life stuff, I don't think it really has much value. Do it with an open mind and go, okay, maybe this person has something to say. Because if you can understand that that point of view which you are against, you'll find interesting things happen. It's a little scary, uh, because you find your own point of view challenged. You find that you're going, maybe I wasn't right about that. Uh, and a lot of us don't like our points of views to be challenged, but I think it's important to challenge your own point of view and to try to see if the other side has something valuable to say. I think a lot of politics is like haggling. If you ever go to one of those countries, most of the countries in the world, I guess, um, where you have to haggle over prices of things. If you're in America or Japan or most of Europe, you see a price tag on a thing, and that's what you're going to pay. You go to places like Mexico or places in Africa, like where I grew up, and that's not always the case. Uh, so. So what happens when you haggle is the person says 100 and you say 25 and you settle at 50. So people learn that if they want 50, they have to say 100. If you want $50 for your blanket or whatever it is you made, you have to tell the person who wants to buy it that it costs 100. If you tell them it costs 50, you're going to get 25. I think politics works that way. People take one extreme view and say, we must have guns for everybody, and the other side says, we must have guns for nobody, and they settle for, some kind of legislation. And you're going to have to be okay with the other side. You're going to have to be okay that there is another side, and there will always be another side. Because the other side isn't just out there, it's in you. It's in your personal makeup. Also contains these battling opposites. So the opposites that you see out there in the world are reflected in you. And when you hold real tight to one side or the other, you make yourself a little crazy. I think we could all stand to try to find out what the other side is saying, and I personally have found it very useful and calming. It's weirdly calming. When I first started looking at right-winger stuff, it would infuriate me. But then I started looking at it more because I thought, well, this is painful, but it's good for me, like medicine. And I found it became less painful and more, and I could get a kind of objectivity about it. So that's my message politically for y'all today. Thanks for watching. I'll put my Patreon page info down there if you want to donate. Put my blog down there, which also has another way of donating to me. Don't make a lot of money writing books, so everything that you donate, I really appreciate. I have said this on my blog before that I make a lot more from donations, either via the blog donation page or now the Patreon page that I have. Make a lot more than I do off of writing books or doing lectures or any of the other things, leading retreats and all that other stuff. I don't even get paid for a lot of the retreats I lead. Most of them I get paid for, but a number of them I don't. So your donations are appreciated, and thank you very much.